welcome back to the Age of Political Review. Today's topic is the U.S. Iran war, particularly the coverage of it. So if the newly signed peace deal holds, or if it fails, the press in particular need to learn lessons from it, from its portrayal, how the conflict was framed, from its use of good versus evil dichotomies, to the persistent dehumanization of Iranian citizens, the inability of the press to distinguish the government from the citizenry. To discuss this is my very, very first guest on this YouTube channel. His name is Kourosh Ziabari. He is a New York-based journalist and media studies researcher. He is a contributor to New Lines magazine, has a master's degree in journalism from the Columbia University School of Journalism. He is a recipient of the Professional Excellence Award from the Foreign Press Correspondents Association in 2022. He's also an alumnus of the East-West Center's Journalists Seminar Fellowship, and in 2022 he was a World Press Institute Fellow with the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. But look, his work is also really important. So there are three articles that I want to talk about before I show you the interview. The first one is this article about this Tehran music school and how this Israeli airstrike destroyed this Honiak Music Academy based in Tehran. So this school took 15 years to build, and it had 250 students and 22 different teachers. And the story is very interesting because it follows the owner around and how he says that the school had become a cultural heritage for Persian music. It had become a livelihood for staff, but in a blink of an eye, in a snap of a finger, it was reduced to rubble. So the piece emphasizes the human cost of the attack, the lives shattered, the instruments, the musical instruments that were lost, and how difficult it is to rebuild amid war. The second article, this is a co-authored piece, is about how these Venezuelan and Iranian exiles helped sell U.S. pressure and helped sell regime change politics, and it lent them moral legitimacy. So leaders like Maria Corina Machado, they pushed for harsh sanctions, for military intervention, but only to discover later on that the administration was simply interested in transactional diplomacy and compliant leaders over more rebellious ones. And that the activists, while they were pushing for sanctions, they realized later on that those devices only hurt ordinary folks back home. And the last one is quite interesting, and it is very similar to the first, is that cultural erasure during wartime is exposed during this war. And it's like cultural heritage has been damaged because of this hollow, fragile, rules-based international order. Because, you know, we've got these protected monuments and cultural sites and museums that we say that are protected, but 150 of them alone, including UNESCO sites, were damaged. So it's interesting that human heritage can be considered accidental collateral damage. And it's very interesting because the piece says that, look, where is this Western double standard? Because, you know, the international law that we're supposed to hold dear is only enforced selectively, and it fails when powerful states like the United States violate it. So what I'm doing is to turn it over and show you this really interesting interview, and let me know what you think in the comments afterward. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I've been following your career for a very long time, and I think that you and I have been sharing links for years. And whenever you share a link with me on Twitter or as they call X, it's usually one of the first things that I come to. But I want to talk, I really have five main questions for you. And the first one involves how civilization, Iranian civilization, is framed. So, um, during the air campaign, the bombing campaign, we saw this sharp divide, a cognitive divide, where Western military actions were framed as tactical, and then the Iranian responses were categorized as aggression. Why does the international press suffer from this kind of cognitive deficit where it can't seem to understand that a nation has the right to defend itself, defend its sovereign territory, or the right to self-defense outside of this good versus evil kind of binary?
Thanks very much, Mark. It's a pleasure to join you today. And indeed, it's been a while since we first started just conversing on social media and exchanging articles and publications. So it's a pleasure to join you today after a long while. Um, well, I mean, the portrayal of Iran in the media, based on my understanding of how the coverage has been working, um, actually reveals a set of deficits, as you called it. And at the same time, there are many advantages in the way the coverage is framed, the way it is. I feel and I've observed this based on empirical evidence of reporting on the country for the past roughly 17, 18 years. I mean, I started my work as a journalist since I was a teenager, and technically when I was a kid in my father's newsroom. So it's been a while, and my life has been intertwined with the traditional journalism that has been handed down to me as a reporter and journalist. So all of these are pretty much close to my personal and life observations, and it's something that I've been growing up with. And I've always been curious as to why the coverage of Iran in the mainstream media and the global press is apparently steeped in a set of pre-ordained and predefined stereotypes and cliches, and that it doesn't actually happen to be exceeding those stereotypes that have been embedded and entrenched in the media narratives for a long while. Um, and to an extent, of course, there is absolutely no way we can separate the politics of Iran and the way its relations with the outside world have been evolving from the way Iran is being covered in the media. So, regardless of Iran's history, Iran's past, Iran's um, glorious culture and civilization, what happens in Iran's day-to-day relations with the outside world actually defines and dictates how it is covered in the mainstream media. So even if we are living in the most storied and most hallowed traditions of journalism, whether it's in the US or Britain or elsewhere, countries which have actually been able to safeguard the principles of free speech and freedom of expression and objectivity in the media, countries from which the most distinguished, prominent journalists and writers have emerged. Still, there's I mean, a limited number of ways in which we can separate the politics of these countries' relations with other nations in the world and the way their media frame the rest of the world. Obviously, there is the idea of detachment. So we tend to be more frivolous and less precise when it comes to framing and understanding nations which are geographically and physically very distant from us.
Mm,
So, of course, you get to see a more nuanced coverage of, for example, I assume Mexico in the US because it's a neighboring country, or Canada,
mm,
because obviously the fates and the destinies of the countries are intertwined, and they're pretty much dependent on each other for trade and for
mhm.
national security and all of these. While Iran, thousands of miles away, doesn't have this day-to-day impact on the life of Americans, and so you can be more casual and more even carefree when you cover Iran, and you can even be more
But that doesn't make it right, though.
That's correct, and that's the real politic of the way media have been functioning, which is why I guess we are reeling from a crisis of misinformation and disinformation, which I believe is our current problem today. I mean,
Mhm.
if we had a tradition of rigorous
Mhm.
journalism in which we apply the same standards of fact-checking, verification, authenticity, objectivity to every subject and a story that we covered, we wouldn't end up in a position in which so many false narratives and so many instances of even disinformation and stereotypes being perpetuated about a country about which we pretty much do not know
Mhm.
much, but we are actually reading about the country on the headlines every day. So, I
This is
mean,
a this is a kind of narrative that dates back many years. You know, this goes back to the War on Terror, and there's a New York Times columnist, Thomas Friedman, who said, you know, essentially that Islam has yet to sort of achieve the kind of modernity that the West has, and that was a kind of a racist argument. So that the narrative of Islam or as of Muslim countries as being backward or as somehow not being as enlightened as the West feeds the narrative of good versus evil or developed versus undeveloped, civilized or uncivilized.
That's correct. Unfortunately, many of the prominent, distinguished journalists and authors we've been relying on for our wisdom of the world and to enlighten us about the rest of the world have also been part of extending lifespan of false narratives and sometimes misinformation and biases that we have kind of internalized. So it's sad and it's unfortunate to see that. I mean, a journalist exactly like Tom Friedman you mentioned has at times, despite the brilliant, exceptional journalism that he has published over the years, and it's really impossible to
Yeah,
downplay the importance of what he has
yeah.
done, still has at times nurtured and fed into narratives that are entirely
This was
indefensible.
Yeah, this was something he said back in 2001 during the Afghan war. So,
And
you know,
even
when
recently, I mean, there
something's
was a commentary, I mean, just I guess in 2024, he published that happened to be quite controversial, in which
yeah, I'm
he
familiar.
compared
Yeah,
countries in the
yeah,
Middle East to parasites. And so, I mean, sometimes we actually take it for granted that
yeah,
our audiences and our readers need to accept and take at face value whatever we share with them because we are so authoritative and so,
yeah,
I mean, admired widely that they do not have to or they do not
yeah,
have the right to question
yeah.
our wisdom and our prudence.
Correct.
Sometimes it's true, but it doesn't have to be that way always. At the same time, journalism needs to be critical of itself in order to thrive and in order to survive.
Yeah,
So when we look at the many ways in which journalism has at times played into the hand of authoritarians and
yeah,
warmongers and others by paving the way for their agendas and for their roadmap and their plan of action of division and polarization, then we have to question ourselves and ask whether or not we have been able to live up to our mission and to just because obviously when you ask journalists, they won't say that our mission is to bring communities together because obviously we are always um, told or we are always taught that we need to enlighten and inform people and then they make their own decisions. But obviously, when people make educated and informed decisions, they won't be divided. They would just come together, and cohesion is the value that would thrive. That's not what we're seeing today. And even if we informing people of the news and developments halfway on the other side of the ocean or the world,
mm,
this is not how it should be because
yeah,
we are minimizing and caricaturizing nations and communities without
yeah,
telling our audiences about much of their realities. Just
yeah.
we are highlighting some instances which still extend and reinforce our own biases.
That goes into the second question, I think. So, the words we choose, the language we use. So, if you look at the language used in the coverage of the war, there's a kind of double standard in the vocabulary, and Jake Lynch is at the University of Sydney. He's a professor of peace journalism, and he uses peace journalism as a tool to teach journalists how to frame conflicts more correctly. And the use of barbaric or slaughter are very rarely applied in Western newsrooms to when it comes to the destruction of Iranian schools and homes and civilian infrastructure. So how does this linguistic imbalance shape how the moral perceptions of the Western public are formed, and how do you fix this?
I guess the war on Iran exposed many of the inconsistencies and imbalances of the media coverage of the world. And I was personally very struck and shocked to see that in many cases, journalism is not even fulfilling 10% of its potential. Because if at a time of crisis like that, when a potentially multinational conflict is raging in the Middle East, in which so many actors are involved, and all of them are just stacked against one nation, which is just fighting for its survival and its future and for its existence. And I guess journalism could have done much better. For example, I mean, I've heard this multiple times. Reporters, White House correspondents, national security reporters saying that I was on the phone with President Trump like 5 minutes ago and he told me this and this and that.
Yeah.
But I actually tried to trace at least one single thread because that's my concern, my priority in the coverage. Culture, heritage, and academia are two major areas of reporting, and I mean things that I follow very closely. And I mean, from a personal standpoint, they value they mean a lot to me. And I was struggling to just find one journalist, one reporter saying that I was on the phone with President Trump. And I asked him, why are you bombing Iran's UNESCO World Heritage Sites? Why are 149 cultural landmarks, including five UNESCO World Heritage Sites, bombed across Iran? Why are you striking Iranian universities, these world-class prestigious universities that are being razed to the ground? I never heard that question from anyone, and everyone was asking about the same thread of the Strait of Hormuz being reopened and when and how, or what's the next phase of the military operation. Sometimes we end up in loopholes of cognition and in thinking that I guess it's very difficult for us to wean ourselves off from those echo chambers. So because everyone is asking the same question, we believe that that's probably the right question, or that's the priority, or that's just the most burning, urgent question to explore. But there might be so many other questions that no one is touching upon, no one is just approaching it because it's apparently not crossing someone's radar, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. I mean, you're talking about a country that is one of the oldest, most ancient civilizations in the world. And apparently, in every corner of this country which you bomb, there is some historic site, some cultural landmarks that belong to the humanity that is being either damaged or destroyed. So you
Yeah.
cannot indiscriminately
But
go on a carpet bombing campaign.
no one seems to distinguish the culture from the government.
And at the same time,
Yeah.
I mean, even though some people have been trying to draw the distinction, it's been done in such a disingenuous and unfortunately dishonest way that even those distinctions or similarities or overlapped parts have really been erased and have been neglected. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, how can we identify an entire military campaign as an attempt to punish a government and then justify that the killing of 168 children teachers
Yeah, it's
is
awful.
kind of the collateral damage of that operation without
Yeah.
taking responsibility, without even extending an apology. Even yesterday, I guess, or 2 days ago, Trump was asked about the outcome of the investigations that have been going on. And he said, well, that's a strange question to be asked because that was a long time ago. So
Mm.
does it mean that because it happened like 4 months ago, it shouldn't be questioned, or its relevance or importance has faded? Or, I mean, all of these framings, which we as journalists have, unfortunately, maybe unwittingly and unintentionally, have breathed and have kind of perpetuated um, these frames of thinking have turned into a culture of reporting,
Mm.
in which sometimes our work overlaps with PR, with doing government publicity. And sadly, I guess at some point we will realize that we are perhaps not doing our job correctly.
Yeah. All right. So, getting to this next question, and I want to get back to this punditry issue. And there's another sort of cognitive disconnect when pundits are talking on the air, and they claim, "Oh, we're standing with the Iranian people. We're distinguishing the people from the government." But at the same time, we tend to erase them in practice. So, for example, when you talk on an air, they're usually relying on outdated, you know, factually incorrect tropes, particularly about Iranians female literacy and rights or political rights. And so this outdated tropes and these outdated information, what does that tell us about media literacy regarding Iranian society in general?
I mean, first, I can try to comment on this from a broader perspective and
Hmm.
acknowledge that I believe that there's a crisis of integrity and authenticity in the media. And sadly, the job is being outsourced to influencers and pundits, as you said. And journalists are somewhat sometimes being marginalized
Mm.
in the conduction of the discourse. At times when we need facts and factual reporting and ethical reporting, we are actually turning to so-called experts who mostly
Mhm.
have had an influencer background and are
Yeah.
now shaping our understanding of many of these sensitive geopolitical questions.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's kind of the nature of the political evolution that we are experiencing these days. I mean, you see that, for example, the Defense Department has been pretty much emptied of all of these legacy reporters who covered it in the past. Now they're mostly influencers and social media icons who are covering these serious questions of war and peace.
There's no correspondence at the Pentagon anymore. That all the news organizations left because of the Pentagon policy. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's a trend, and even in major news programs and cable TV and other programs, it's mostly, I mean, a display of the tendency of or the tendency to feature pundits and influencers instead of actual academics, experts, and those who have been trained in these areas as areas of specialization in order to do the coverage and the commentary and to provide the expertise. So
Yeah.
that's
Right.
one crisis that we are reeling from. At the same time, what you questioned about the understanding of Iran and the media literacy around Iran is what I've also been trying to keep track of for a while. And I guess the outcome of these long years of what is clearly a pattern of dehumanization of Iranians
Mm.
for all of these cultural ideological reasons is that yes, we can just claim explicitly on all of our commentaries and in our discourse, in our rhetorical gestures that we stand in solidarity with the people of Iran. At the same time, we end up erasing and diminishing their dignity and their existence and their reality. So
Yeah.
I mean, standing in solidarity is a great idea, but it doesn't mean anything while you're refusing to acknowledge their experiences, while you are refusing to engage with them in meaningful conversations. And at the same time, it doesn't mean anything when you are failing or refusing to learn about their history, their multiple experiences. I
Yeah,
mean, we always minimize Iran to a monolith, as if
yeah.
everyone in that society thinks, believes, dresses, worships the same, and subscribes to the same ideology, the same political persuasion.
Yeah,
At least
they
not the
have
case.
we tend to have this homogenous view of Iran, and we forget how culturally diverse it actually is. And I had the same issue when I was living in Amman, Jordan, and when people would ask me where I live or where I was, that they had a certain idea about what Jordan was, and its proximity to Lebanon, its proximity to Israel, its past war with there, and people always ask me very familiar questions, and these questions were based on outdated information or these basic tropes about the Middle East in general, and that these countries certainly have no identity of their own, and our constructions of them are completely misinformed. But I have a follow-up question here, and it's really one of really connected. It's, you said that, the access on the ground is limited, right? And as you say, that the networks have relied on experts, so not experts, but influencers. And I think a lot of those influencers are basically members of the diaspora, or they're external think tank folks, who often lack the local context because they've been absent from Iran for many, many years, or they simply lack the local cultural context or the language skills. So this professional danger is that the press is relying on kind of echo chamber rather than on the ground realities, and they're not communicating really with folks on the ground. And I guess, how did this alone skew the coverage of the war?
Exactly. I guess for a number of reasons, including a lack of access and a lack of willingness to improve our standards of reporting
Hmm.
and our practices and methods, we are really behind on the reality of life
Yeah.
in Iran, and we are not able to catch up with what the people of Iran are experiencing. So it's just because our expectations require that we follow certain threads or certain keywords in the coverage of Iran means that we are missing out on a number of developments that the modern Iranian society is going
Yeah.
through. Of course, there is a serious situation of human rights violations. There is an ongoing battle between the theocracy and its people. There is press freedom
Hmm.
crisis and a situation in which journalists are in danger. All of this is correct, but it doesn't mean that we can still minimize the reality of Iran just to these three, four bullet points of perpetual crisis.
All right. Well, that was very, very interesting and enlightening, and I think what will be very compelling, informative, and for a lot of the audience was, I know, unsurprising. As this is the age of political review, as I call it. Uh, these are folks from this continent, and they're going to be well familiar with Central Asia, the Middle East, and various multicultural contexts. So I don't think this is really an American audience, although this is hosted by an American. But I really appreciate you coming on. You are my first ever guest. I think that's great. And hopefully you come back when we have something else new to talk about other than a violent conflict. And I think it would be interesting to again to talk about Iran in the Middle East in another context, not in this dichotomous framing where the Middle East is framed as as good and or not good, but evil or backwards, or they're savages, as like we'd like to talk about. And um, it would be a nice relief quite a departure from what we've seen in the headlines, not just in Iran, but in Gaza, the last many months before. So I really appreciate you coming on, and you were a very ideal first guest. And I thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. All right.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay.